Today we're going to talk again about the makeup of Congress. It's that this time we're going to focus on the demographics and congressional leadership. So when you hear some of those names on TV, you'll know exactly what they do, what their jobs are. So our goals for today to describe the advantages of incumbency, to describe a typical member of Congress, to describe the current makeup of Congress, to describe the leadership hierarchy within the Congress, to explain the duties and importance of congressional leadership and floor leaders, to explain the importance of duties of a committee chair, and to describe a typical day for a member of Congress. So let's start out by elections. When you are the incumbent, when you already have the job, your odds of being reelected to Congress are extremely high. Those people who have already won a seat in Congress are more than likely to win it again. Historically, usually somebody in the Senate will win a re-election about 80 to 100% of the time, and somebody in the House usually about 85 to 100% of the time. So for example, the idea of being an incumbent can help you win re-election. In the House of Representatives in 2016, 98% of members of the House won re-election. Senate was a little bit less, 93% won re-election. So once you have the job, it's pretty easy to keep the job. And if we look at why approval ratings for our own members of Congress are pretty good, but why they're not so good for Congress as a whole, part of this could come from the fact that people stay in office. And how do they stay in office? Well, first of all, you have the benefits of name recognition. They say that congressional name recognition is a huge deal in winning elections. So much so that in the presidential election in 2000, a lot of people, when they voted for George W. Bush, when asked afterwards, they thought they were voting for his daddy, George H.W. Bush. The Taft name is so popular in Ohio politics that there are actually politicians who change their last name to Taft in order to try to win re-election. So name recognition is pretty important. Another thing is access to free media. If I'm Joe Citizen, if I'm just me, and I call a press conference, nobody's going to listen. But if I'm a United States Senator or a United States member of the House of Representatives and I call a press conference, chances are the media is going to show up and they're going to report on me, and then voila, more name recognition. Another thing that you have access to is franking, and what franking means is free mail for official business. So a member of Congress can simply sign the top of an envelope instead of putting a stamp on it, and they get to mail stuff for free. How does this help you win re-election? Well, you can't send advertising materials, but what you can send is information about your district and all the things that you're doing in your district, which once again helps out with name recognition. Another thing that people have is the inside track on fundraising. If you are already elected to office, people are much more likely to donate to your campaign because it seems pretty likely that you're going to win. If we go back to the donation strategy that we talked about in the last unit, if you want to buy access, if we talk about access strategy, you want to buy access to a politician donating to their campaign, especially one who's already won office, will give you pretty good insider access. And then finally, when it comes to gerrymandering, district lines are drawn to the favor of the incumbent, at least if you run for election every 10 years. If you are within the district that supports you, your district lines are probably drawn to your favor in the first place. That's how you won the election, and they will continue to be drawn that way because of gerrymandering. All right, question for you. How would you describe a typical member of Congress? Would you like to be a member of Congress? Why or why not? All right, so let's take a look at Congress. Congress is a majority of Congress are white men and they're usually middle-aged to elderly white men. So if we look at Congress in the overall population is the blue, the red is the House, and the green is the Senate. So if we look at African Americans, about 12% in the regular population, 9 or 1% in Congress. Hispanics, 12% in the general population, 5 and 3% in Congress. Asian Americans, 3% of the population, less than 1 and 2% in Congress. Overall, the United States is made up of 51% women, yet only 17% of members of Congress are women. So again, if we want to generalize, Congress is a majority of white males. Other things that we can say about Congress, they're generally older than the rest of the population. Only 17% of the American population is the age 60 or older. 40% of Congress was age 60 or older. Currently, the average age in the Senate is 61 years old. The House of Representatives is 51 years old. So as you can see, Congress is much older than the average. Now, why might this average be so high? Well, here's one thing. The older you are, the more experienced you are, the more likely it is that you're going to get elected to Congress. People sometimes hesitate to vote for younger people because they have less experience. If we talk about the people who have the means to win a congressional seat, the money, the name recognition, the power, they generally tend to be people who've had a lot of life experiences, and that's how they won election in the first place. So maybe this is not a bad thing that Congress is older. It just simply means that Congress has a lot more experience in getting there. Occupations prior to Congress, you're not going to need to know every single one of these, but you should know the top couple ones. 27% of all members of Congress were lawyers before they came to Congress. About 22% served somewhere in the public service sector or in politics in general, so career politicians. About 20% of people were businessmen and women, and so this makes up a majority of the members of Congress. Smaller amounts, educators like myself. Of course, I'll probably never be a member of Congress. 8% for other 4% real estate agents, 3% agriculture, 2% in medicine, and 1% in journalism. So most people from professional fields like business and law generally tend to become members of Congress. And again, we can look at a chart that shows us the same thing. The American population, House and Senate, do not necessarily look so much like Congress does. Members of Congress tend to be much more well-educated than the general population. Only about 27% of Americans have college degrees. 93% of the members of Congress had college degrees. And if we look at the types of degrees that people in Congress have, they generally tend to be significantly more in the higher fields like master's degree, law, or professional degrees or doctorate degrees. And so members of Congress tend to be much more well-educated than the rest of the country. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I kind of want a very well-educated member of Congress. I want somebody who's smarter than me running the country. Some crazy statistics. All but 3 members of Congress last time around had college degrees, and over 2/3 of them had advanced degrees, and that's what we saw in the last graphic. Other things about members of Congress, they generally tend to be wealthier. While the median net worth of the American family was $120,000, the median net worth for a member of Congress was $912,000, so significantly more. And your odds of being a millionaire in the general public, 1 in 22. Your odds of being a millionaire in Congress, about 50%. So members of Congress generally tend to be pretty wealthy. About 260 members of Congress are millionaires or more. And 62% of the Senate is a millionaire or more. The median net worth about 1.7 million. And the House, it's a little bit less with 684,000, but that's still a whole lot more than much of the rest of the population. All right, so how is Congress organized? How is Congress arranged? Currently, this is 2017 numbers. These, of course, could change in the future. The current makeup of Congress has 46 Democrats in the Senate, 52 Republicans, and 2 independents, although those 2 independents caucus are, generally speaking, they vote with the Democrats. So currently, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. House of Representatives, currently 237 seats controlled by the Republicans, 193 by the Democrats, and as of the time that this is being recorded, 5 seats are vacant. That is people when the president got elected, many of them took jobs with the president, and so some of those seats are vacant and will be replaced. All right, so floor leaders. Floor leaders are the most powerful people in Congress. They're the movers and the shakers. They're the people who really direct how the rest of Congress is going to run. So the Vice President of the United States, President pro tempore of the Senate, the majority and minority leaders of both the House and the Senate, and the majority and minority secretaries are also pretty important positions within Congress. All of the floor leaders are chosen by majority, so the majority leader is chosen by a majority of the Congress. So whatever political party controls Congress, currently the Republicans would also get to choose the majority leader. And that's how all these positions are chosen, by majority. Now, it does how you get picked within your own political party. So you have to be from the majority party for the majority seats and the minority party for the minority. And generally, these positions are chosen by seniority. That the longer you've been there, the better shot that you have at getting the job. Of course, seniority is not the only factor. You also have to be popular, and you also have to want the job. A lot of people don't want to be congressional leadership, so there are a lot of things, but your popularity in the world as a whole, and especially your popularity within the House or the Senate, and your seniority have a huge factor to play on whether or not you're going to be a floor leader. So probably the most important position in Congress, or at least in the House of Representatives, is the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House, of course, is the leader of the majority party. And as the Speaker of the House, you really get to set the agenda for the House. Look, if you're currently a Democrat, you could have the greatest idea in the world, but because the House is currently controlled by the Republicans, if the Speaker of the House of Representatives doesn't like your idea or doesn't like you, your issue may never get put on the House agenda, no matter how important it may be, no matter how popular it may be. If you don't know the right people, your stuff doesn't get put on the agenda. So one of the reasons why members of Congress generally tend to work together in such a partisan way, focused around their political parties, is because you don't want to make the majority leader or the Speaker of the House upset. Because if you do, your issue doesn't get put on the agenda. And then people don't vote on your idea, and if nobody votes on your idea, you get nothing done. And if you get nothing done, you don't get reelected. Another job of the Speaker of the House is to conduct the meetings. So you can see at the center of the House of Representatives, go on a close-up trip, we'll actually see this in action. You can see the Speaker of the House conducts the House meetings. Other floor leaders in the House include the minority leader. So the head of the minority party, who sets the agenda for the minority party, in this case currently the Democrats, would be the minority leader. And so this is a pretty important position to have. Both the majority and minority party have what are known as whips, and a whip is an assistant party leader. The job of a whip is to convince other members of your party to vote on legislation the way the party wants you to vote. So if the Republicans want all their members to vote yes on Trump care, then they would go around and try to convince, and they would bargain, and they would try to reach those deals. And they're called whips because way back in the old day in British Parliament, they would actually literally carry around whips, and if you didn't vote that way, they would whip you. They don't do this in Congress anymore. Today, the way it works is they threaten you. If you don't vote for our legislation, our new law, then we're not going to vote for your law either. And that ends up not working to the advantage of everybody. And so again, if you want to know why we have so much partisanship or inter-party workings, it's because if you don't vote for my bill, I'm not going to vote for your bill, and your stuff doesn't get on the agenda. And if your stuff doesn't get on the agenda, well, then you don't get reelected. Another very powerful position in the House of Representatives is a committee chair. Committee chairs are the ones who run the committee meetings, and they're probably most important because they set the agenda for that committee. Again, you could have the greatest idea in the world, but if the committee chair won't put it on the agenda, it's not going to get considered. One of the things that you're going to do throughout the course of this unit, you're going to look up the Speaker of the House, the majority leader of the House, the minority leader in the House, and you're going to tell me a little bit about these people. So if we want to look at the structure of the House, at the top we've got the Speaker of the House. Below the Speaker is the majority leader and the minority leader, and below them the majority whip and the minority whip, and below them the general membership. Now, the Senate. The Senate is organized in many ways similar to the House, but a few key differences. First of all, the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate is always the Vice President of the United States. And as President of the Senate, the Vice President of the United States only has two real jobs. Number one, to serve as the presiding officer. What that means is he will run the meetings and to break a tie if there is a tie vote in the Senate, which doesn't happen all too often, but sometimes it does. Another key job is the President pro tempore of the Senate. The President pro tempore of the Senate is the person who serves in the absence of the President of the Senate, or basically when the Vice President isn't there. Because the Vice President is doing many more other, what we would consider probably more important things than running the Senate, we always have somebody there, usually the head of the majority party, who will run the Senate meetings when the President of the Senate is not there. President of the Senate, to be fair, the Vice President usually only shows up on the opening day of the session, the closing day of the session, and other than that, only if it's a really prestigious vote going on or if it looks like there's going to be a tie. If it looks like there's going to be a tie going in, the President of the Senate will show up so he can be the tie-breaking vote. But other than that, usually it's the President pro tempore of the Senate who is running the Senate meeting. So in the absence of the Vice President, he is in charge. And then the Senate has a majority leader just like the House, but the Senate majority leader is a little bit more powerful than the House majority leader. In the House, the Speaker of the House sets the agenda. In the Senate, it is the majority leader of the Senate's duty to set the agenda. So again, if you are not in good with the majority leader, no matter how great of an idea you have, it doesn't get put on the agenda. And if it's not on the agenda, your issue doesn't get heard. And if your issue doesn't get heard, you don't get reelected. Senate leadership, you're going to look all these up, the President pro tempore of the Senate, the majority leader, and the minority leader. Other floor leaders. So these positions, we're going to go through these really quick because they're the same as in the House. They have the same duties as in the House, except they're going to do it on the Senate side of the aisle. So we've got a minority leader, we've got majority and minority whips, and we also have committee chairs. So just like the House has those floor leaders, the Senate has them as well. So our hierarchy of the Senate, at the top we've got the President of the Senate. Under him is or her, the President pro tempore of the Senate, and next to them, the majority leader, the minority leader, and under them, the majority and minority whip. And then, of course, under them is the general membership. I always think this is interesting. This is a typical day in the life of a member of Congress. At 8:30, breakfast with a former member. At 9:30, you've got a committee hearing. At 10 o'clock, you've got a private briefing. Also at 10 o'clock, you have a committee meeting. So you got two things going at once. So you probably go to one thing and then slide on to the other, or you send somebody in your place. At noon, you've got a photo opportunity and a lunch meeting, probably two different things in two different places. So you're double booked. At 1:30, a committee meeting for science, a committee meeting for commerce. So again, try to be in two places at once. At 2 o'clock, the House actually begins meeting. At 3 o'clock, you've got a meeting with an interest group. 4:30, you got a meeting with an interest group. 5 o'clock, you've got a reception. 5 o'clock, you also have a meeting. 5:30, you have a reception. 6, you have a reception. 6, you've got another reception. And 6, you've got another reception. So again, your time is double booked, triple booked, and you try to be in many places at once, and you say a couple kind words and have a couple meetings and then move on. And then officially 10:45 at night, the House adjourns. And so members of Congress are also always doing multiple things at one point in time. They're never just doing one thing. A lot of times their time is double booked, and a lot of their interns or a lot of their staffers will help them with what they're doing. But other than that, they go from place to place. And so sometimes schedules of a member of Congress can be pretty tight. Let's take a look at the House in action. This is the House of Representatives in a meeting.
Back is time. What purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Mr. Speaker, good afternoon. Request permission or unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Highly paid CEOs are in town to tell America how to avoid the fiscal cliff. The top priority of the Fix the Debt CEOs is to cut the essential commitments of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. No skin.
All right, we could watch that for a while, but it'd probably bore you to death. Probably one of the things that you noticed, well, tell me something you noticed in that video. Yeah, you probably noticed that there were only about 10-15 people there in the audience, which seems a little weird. The House of Representatives is made up of 435 people, yet there were only 20 people in the House. And you're probably wondering, well, how does that happen? And that is, there are some rules with the House of Representatives that you have to have what is known as quorum. And quorum means you have to have enough members for an official meeting. In order to have enough members from an official meeting, you have to have a majority of the people there. That is half plus one. Well, clearly, there were not half plus one of the House of Representatives there. Half plus one would mean that there would be 218 people there. You didn't see 218 people. In the Senate, it would be 51 people. So how do they get away with running a meeting if they don't have all 218 people there? Well, the answer is quite simple or complicated. We said that members of the House of Representatives are often very busy, Senate as well. They often try to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things at once. And so what they're currently doing is most of those members of the House or the Senate, they're probably either off at meetings somewhere or they're working in their offices. And instead of actually being there, what they're doing is watching a TV feed, or their staffers are watching for them, and then they'll let them know when something important goes on. Now, if you're thinking, well, we still don't have half the people there, what do the rules say? Well, the rules are kind of vague. They say you have to have quorum in order to hold a meeting, but quorum is always assumed unless somebody actually asks for it. So unless somebody says, I asked for a quorum call, and then they would actually do an attendance call, and they'd start reading everybody's name, and you'd have to check in. If nobody calls for quorum, they assume that there's half plus one there. Now, clearly there's not, and everybody in the room knows that there's not, but still that's an assumption that is made. Now, when something important comes up, they have a system of bells and whistles. So if you look at any clock in the House of Representatives or the Senate, they have these little lights around them, and these lights all symbolize something. In addition, you would actually hear bells start to ring throughout the course of the morning if something important happened. So one bell in the Senate means that there's about to be a vote. And so if there is a vote, that means you need to get out of your office and you need to head over there to vote. 2 bells would symbolize a quorum call, 3 call for absentees, 4 adjournment, 5 minutes left to vote, and 6 would mean the end of morning business in the Senate. House has their symbols as well. And this is so that members of Congress can multitask, or at least try to multitask. They can work in their offices or work around the Capitol Hill, and at the same time, when an important vote comes up, they could go in, vote, and then leave. That's all I've got for you today. Have a wonderful day.